"You're not in my will," my dad said, pushing his plate away like he'd just passed the salt. My sister laughed. Yes, being the favorite finally paid off. I felt every eye at the table turn toward me, then Dad added, "You made your choices." And that's when the lawyer cleared his throat. "My name is Savannah Brooks, and I'm 34 years old. I'm a middle school English teacher, the steady one in the family, not flashy, not loud. My sister, Danielle, runs part of my dad's small construction business. She's always been the one they praised. I moved out at 19, paid my own college tuition with loans and weekend jobs. Dad said I was too soft to survive in the real world. I wasn't rich or glamorous, but I had something they didn't expect. I had patience, and I had proof. If you've ever been compared to the favorite and made to feel invisible, hit that subscribe button. I know what it's like to sit at that table and smile through it. Drop a comment if you felt that sting too, and click hype so this story reaches someone who needs it. Let me take you back to where it started. Sunday dinner at Dad's house wasn't optional. It never had been. Not when I was a kid trying to finish homework before curfew. And not now at 34, when I had papers to grade and lesson plans to finish. But you showed up. That was the rule. Dad's house. Dad's table, Dad's world. The dining room smelled like roasted chicken and the faint trace of his cigar smoke that clung to the curtains no matter how many times I suggested airing the place out. Danielle was already seated when I arrived, scrolling through her phone with that smug little smile she'd perfected over the years. She looked up just long enough to say, "Oh good, you made it. Thought you might bail." I didn't respond. I never did. Responding only fed the fire. And I'd learned that lesson the hard way. Dad walked in carrying a bottle of wine like he was about to toast something momentous. He set it down with a thud that made the silverware rattle. "Got something important to share tonight," he announced, looking around the table at the cousins, the neighbors he'd invited for reasons I still didn't understand, and finally at me. My stomach tightened. Nothing good ever came from Dad's announcements. The last time he had important news, it was about how Danielle had landed a major contract for the business. He'd spent 20 minutes detailing her brilliance while I sat there nodding, my lasagna going cold. This time felt different though, heavier. There was a man in a suit sitting at the far end of the table. Someone I vaguely recognized but couldn't place. He had a leather briefcase beside his chair and kept glancing at Dad like he was waiting for permission to breathe. "I've been thinking about the future," Dad started, pouring himself a generous glass of wine. "About legacy, about who's going to carry on what I've built." Danielle straightened in her chair, practically glowing. I felt my jaw tighten. Danielle's been running operations for 3 years now. She's proven herself. She's got the vision, the drive, the loyalty. He paused, letting that last word hang in the air like a blade. "So I've decided. The business goes to her, the house too. It's all in writing now, legal and official." The table erupted in polite applause. Cousins I barely spoke to nodded approvingly. Danielle beamed, reaching over to squeeze Dad's hand. "Thanks, Dad. I won't let you down." I sat frozen, fork halfway to my mouth, unable to swallow the bite I'd just taken. This wasn't a private conversation. This wasn't even a family meeting. This was a public execution. Dad turned to me then, his expression somewhere between pity and disappointment. "Savannah chose books over blood," he said, like he was explaining a simple math problem. "She wanted college, wanted to teach, wanted her own life. That's fine, but that's not loyalty. That's not family." Danielle couldn't resist. "Some of us stayed loyal," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. The room went quiet. I could feel their eyes on me, could sense the judgment settling like dust. Dad took another sip of wine and added, almost as an afterthought, "You'll be fine. Teachers don't need much." The words hit like a slap. I set my fork down carefully, trying to keep my hand from shaking. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and tell them all exactly what I thought of their loyalty, their legacy, their twisted version of family. But I didn't. I just pushed my chair back and stood up. That's when the lawyer cleared his throat. It was soft, almost apologetic, but it cut through the tension like a knife. "Mr. Brooks," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Are you sure you want to phrase it that way?" Dad frowned. "Phrase what?" The lawyer glanced at me, then back at Dad. "The decision itself is your right, of course, but the public nature of this announcement and the language you've used, it could be seen as, well, unnecessarily inflammatory." Danielle's smile faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" The lawyer didn't answer her. He kept his eyes on Dad, waiting. Dad waved a hand dismissively. "It's fine. Savannah understands. Don't you?" I didn't answer. I grabbed my coat from the back of my chair and walked out, the sound of my footsteps echoing down the hallway. Behind me, I heard Danielle laugh, sharp and cruel. Guess she couldn't handle the truth. The weeks that followed were worse than the dinner itself. Danielle made sure I knew I wasn't welcome anymore. I'd call the office to ask about paperwork I'd been copied on for years, just routine family business stuff, and the receptionist would apologize and say, "Miss Brooks said to direct all inquiries through her." When I finally reached Danielle, she was blunt. "You're not part of this anymore, Savannah. Dad made that clear. Stop pretending you have a say." I heard her repeat the sentiment to staff members, to contractors, to anyone who asked. "She's not part of this anymore." Each time, it felt like another door slamming shut. Dad didn't return my calls. When I tried stopping by the house, he pretended not to hear the doorbell. Once, I saw him through the window, reading the newspaper in his chair, deliberately ignoring me. I stood there for 5 minutes before I finally walked away, humiliation burning in my chest. Then came the community fundraiser. It was a big deal in our town. The kind of event where everyone showed up to see and be seen. I almost didn't go, but I committed to helping with the silent auction months earlier, and I wasn't going to let Dad and Danielle drive me into hiding. I was standing near the refreshment table, talking to a former student's mom, when I heard Dad's voice boom across the room. "You know the difference between my daughters," he was saying to a group of business owners gathered around him. "Savannah reads stories, Danielle builds them." The laughter that followed felt like a punch to the gut. I turned and saw him grinning, soaking up the approval of his peers. Danielle stood beside him, nodding along like this was all perfectly reasonable. I forced myself to smile, to nod politely at the woman I'd been talking to act like I hadn't just been humiliated in front of half the town. But something inside me shifted. The hurt I'd been carrying started to harden into something else, something colder, something sharper. A week later, Danielle showed up at my apartment unannounced. She didn't knock so much as pound on the door like she was trying to break it down. I opened it to find her standing there with a folder in her hands and an expression that could freeze lava. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into my living room. "About what?" I asked, closing the door. She tossed the folder onto my coffee table. "About you giving up any future claims to the business or the estate. I need you to sign this." I picked up the folder and flipped it open. It was a legal document, dense with jargon I didn't fully understand, but the gist was clear. By signing, I'd be waiving any right to contest Dad's will or claim any part of the family assets. "Why would I sign this?" I asked, setting it back down. Danielle crossed her arms. "To make it clean, to stop dragging this out. You don't belong in this, Savannah. You never did. Just accept it and move on." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw nothing but contempt. "I'm not signing anything," I said quietly. Her face flushed red. "You're being ridiculous." "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm being careful." She grabbed the folder and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a cup of tea going cold beside me. I'd been thinking about this for weeks, turning it over in my mind, wondering if I was being paranoid or vindictive or just plain stupid. But Danielle's visit had crystallized something. I wasn't going to let them steamroll me, not anymore. I opened a folder on my desktop labeled "Just in Case." It was something I'd started years ago, back when I first noticed things didn't quite add up with the family business. Little things at first, Dad mentioning unpaid taxes in a voicemail. Then brushing it off when I asked about it later, Danielle forwarding me emails by accident, messages about moving money between accounts, about keeping certain expenses off the books. I never planned to use any of it. I just couldn't bring myself to delete it. It felt like insurance, like proof that I wasn't crazy, that the things I noticed were real. Now, staring at those files, I realized I had more than insurance. I had leverage. Emails were going back 3 years, messages where Dad admitted to creative accounting to avoid certain tax obligations. Voicemails where Danielle discussed paying contractors under the table to save money, spreadsheets with discrepancies that didn't make sense unless someone was fudging the numbers. I wasn't a lawyer or an accountant, but even I could see this wasn't above board. My hands shook as I scrolled through it all. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was evidence of something bigger, something that could have real consequences. I closed the laptop and stared at the wall, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to delete everything, to pretend I'd never seen it, to just walk away and let them have their empire. But another part of me, the part that had been ignored and insulted and humiliated for years, refused to let it go. They'd made their choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. The phone call came 2 days later. I was in my classroom, erasing the whiteboard after a long day of teaching sentence structure to 8th graders, when my phone buzzed. The number looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. Hello. I answered, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder as I finished cleaning up. Miss Brooks, this is Gerald Winters. I'm the attorney who was present at your father's dinner last month. I stopped moving. I remember. I was hoping we could speak privately, he said, his voice low and careful. About what? There was a pause, then, about things you should know. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop the next morning before school. I barely slept that night, running through every possible scenario in my head. Was this a trap? Was Danielle behind this? Had Dad sent him to pressure me into signing that document? When I arrived, Gerald was already seated in a corner booth, 2 cups of coffee on the table. He stood when he saw me, shaking my hand with a formality that felt oddly comforting. Thank you for coming, he said as we sat down. I wasn't sure you would. Why did you call me? I asked, skipping the small talk. He sighed, stirring his coffee absently. I've been handling your family's legal matters for 20 years. I've watched you grow up, and I've watched how they treat you. He looked up, meeting my eyes. It's not right. I didn't know what to say to that. He continued, the business isn't as stable as they want people to believe. There are financial issues. Serious ones. Your father and Danielle have been, let's say, less than transparent about certain obligations. Are you telling me they're in trouble? I asked. I'm telling you that if certain agencies decided to look closely, they would find irregularities. And I'm telling you that if this all comes crashing down, they're going to look for someone to blame. He leaned forward. I don't want that person to be you. Over the next hour, Gerald laid it out. The unpaid taxes, the unreported income, the forged signatures on documents that Danielle had signed using Dad's name without proper authorization. It was worse than I thought. Much worse. Why are you telling me this? I asked when he finished. He folded his hands on the table. Because I'm tired of watching good people get hurt by bad decisions, and because I think you deserve to protect yourself. He slid a business card across the table. If you ever need representation, call me. I left that meeting with my head spinning. Danielle, meanwhile, was living her best life. She posted constantly on social media about taking over the empire, about being born for this, about how hard work and loyalty always paid off. Dad acted like I'd ceased to exist. He showed up at community events, shook hands, told stories about his brilliant daughter who was going to carry on his legacy. The singular daughter, as if I'd never been born. They believed they'd already won. They believed I was too soft, too quiet, too irrelevant to do anything about it. But I wasn't soft anymore. I was focused. I spent my evenings organizing everything. I had every email, every voicemail, every text message. I created a timeline, cross-referenced dates, made sure I could back up every single claim with hard evidence. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing this because Gerald was right. If this all fell apart, they would absolutely throw me under the bus to save themselves. I needed to protect myself. One evening, Gerald called again. "Are you ready?" he asked. "Ready for what?" "To protect yourself, officially." I looked at the stack of printed documents on my kitchen table, the folder that had grown from just in case into something much more substantial. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." The formal reading was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at Gerald's office. Dad and Danielle arrived together, both dressed like they were attending a coronation rather than a legal proceeding. I showed up in my usual work clothes, having taken the morning off from teaching. Dad barely acknowledged me. Danielle smirked. "Didn't think you'd bother showing up," she said. I didn't respond. We sat in Gerald's conference room, the three of us on one side of the table, Gerald on the other. He had a stack of papers in front of him and that same uncomfortable expression I'd seen at the dinner. Before we proceed with the formal reading, Gerald began, adjusting his glasses. "There are some legal concerns that need to be addressed." Dad frowned. "What concerns? We've been over this." Gerald glanced at me, then back at Dad. "Concerns regarding the business operations and certain financial irregularities that have come to light." Danielle's smirk vanished. "What irregularities?" "Unreported income, primarily," Gerald said calmly, "as well as questions about signature authority on several key documents." The room went cold. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. The same folder I'd been building for years, now printed and organized with tabs and highlights and sticky notes marking the most damaging parts. I slid it across the table. Dad stared at it like it might explode. Danielle's face went pale. "What is that?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Emails," I said simply. "Voicemails, text messages, documentation of every financial shortcut you've taken over the past 3 years." Dad opened the folder, his hands trembling slightly as he flipped through the pages. I watched the color drain from his face. "Where did you get this?" Danielle demanded, standing up so fast her chair nearly tipped over. "You went through my inbox. That's illegal." I stayed seated, kept my voice calm. "No, you sent them to me by accident. Most of them were forwards you meant to send to Dad but hit my name instead. I just never deleted them." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Gerald cleared his throat. "As I was saying, until these matters are fully investigated and resolved, I cannot in good conscience proceed with executing this will as written. The business assets in question may be subject to liens, penalties, or seizure depending on what regulatory agencies discover. Therefore, control of those assets must be frozen pending resolution." Dad looked at me differently then, not with the dismissive pity I'd seen at dinner, not with the casual cruelty he'd shown at the fundraiser. This was something else. Fear, maybe, or respect, or both. "Savannah," he started, his voice hoarse. I held up a hand. "I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to protect myself. You made it very clear I'm not part of this family anymore. Fine. But I won't let you drag me down when this all falls apart." Danielle was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. "You're my sister," she said, like that meant something. "You were my sister," I corrected, "until you decided I wasn't worth a phone call. Until you laughed when Dad humiliated me in front of everyone we know. Until you tried to make me sign away my rights without even reading what you were asking for." Gerald spoke again, pulling everyone's attention back to him. "Mr. Brooks, Miss Brooks, I strongly suggest you both retain separate legal counsel. There will likely be audits, investigations, and potential penalties. Miss Savannah Brooks has provided documentation that could be relevant to those proceedings." Dad's hands were still on the folder, but he wasn't reading anymore. He was just staring at the papers like they'd betrayed him. I didn't know it was this bad, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, you did. I said, you just didn't want to know. There's a difference. The meeting ended shortly after that. Danielle stormed out without another word. Dad lingered, looking like he wanted to say something, but ultimately followed her. In silence, I stayed behind with Gerald. What happens now? I asked. Now they face the consequences of their choices, he said. And you get to move on with your life. Dad called me 3 weeks later. It was late on a Sunday night, and I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me, Savannah. He said when I picked up. His voice was different, softer, tired. I didn't know how bad it had gotten. I trusted Danielle to handle things, and I didn't ask the right questions. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch out between us. I'm sorry, he continued, for what I said at dinner, for how I treated you. You didn't deserve that. No, I agreed. I didn't. Is there any way we can fix this? He asked. I thought about that for a long moment. Thought about the years of being compared, dismissed, treated like an afterthought. Thought about the humiliation, the exclusion, the casual cruelty. I don't. No, I said honestly, but I do know I'm not going to keep fighting for a seat at a table where I'm not wanted. You were always wanted, he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. No, Dad. I wasn't, and that's okay. I've made my peace. With it, I hung up before he could respond. The next few months were difficult for them. The audits revealed exactly what Gerald had warned about. There were fines, penalties, forced restructuring of the business. Danielle had to step back from operations while everything was investigated. Dad had to sell the house to cover some of the debts. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in their faces. I just focused on my life, my students, my lesson plans, the small apartment I'd made into a home. I started writing again, something I'd given up years ago because Dad said it was a waste of time. I joined a book club. I took a weekend trip to the mountains just because I could. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for approval from people who would never give it. I wasn't measuring my worth by their standards. I was just living, building something that was mine, that nobody could take away with a dinner announcement or a rewritten will. One afternoon, I ran into Danielle at the grocery store. We made eye contact across the produce section. For a second, I thought she might say something, but she just looked away and kept walking. That was fine. I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need apologies or explanations or reconciliation. I'd already moved on. Gerald called me once more, a few months after everything settled. Just wanted to check in. He said, make sure you're doing all right. I am, I said, and I meant it. Good, he said. You deserve that. I thanked him for everything and hung up. Then I went back to grading essays, back to planning lessons, back to the life I built on my own terms. They tried to write me out of their story. And in doing so, they'd freed me to write my own. If your family ever used money or inheritance to control or humiliate you, you know how deep that cut goes. Share your story in the comments. I want to hear how you handled it. Subscribe if you're done letting someone else decide your worth. Click hype to help this story reach others who need it. Did this story hit home? Let me know by liking the video and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Click hype to help this story find others who felt the same way. Your support makes a huge difference.